Hi, come join me for a cup of coffee while I tell you why I don't like Conjugate for raw lifters. I don't want to seem like a Conjugate hater because I actually like some of their principles and their ideas, but for raw lifters, I feel like there's a low level of transferability. My first issue is that there is little to no specificity in the main movements. Specificity is the key driver of strength for raw lifters. The only drawback to being super specific, you don't want to build a weakness somewhere in your chain where you are going to have an injury. With a conjugate lifter, they typically work on a lot of end range work, such as the top portion of a squat or the top portion of a bench. Those things are not going to be the weak point for raw lifters. Those are the weak points for equipped lifters. The weaknesses that raw lifters usually have is at the bottom portion of a movement for squat and bench. So that looks like in the hole or in the change of position for squat or at the bottom position of a bench. The exception to this, and the reason I think conjugate has been used by men for so long, is that men typically are weaker at the lockout regardless. They have bigger muscles, stronger pecs, and weaker triceps relatively, and therefore their triceps need to be developed so that they could finish out their movement. When we add bands and chains to our lifts, it gets less tension at the bottom, more tension at the top, which builds your top end strength and doesn't build your bottom end strength, which increases the disparity of where you need to be strong versus where you actually get strong with conjugate lifting. I'm not saying bands and chains have no use. I think they could have a use. I just think that in conjugate they are overused. In terms of positioning for the squat, a conjugate lifter is going to have typically a wider stance and they're going to sit farther back in the squat. Raw lifter is going to have a more narrow foot positioning and is going to be closer, more compact to their center of gravity with both their feet and with their hips and their knees. The main accessory you're going to see a conjugate lifter use for their squat is the box squat. The box squat is an excellent example of the positioning that a geared lifter should be in. For raw lifters, you have to ask, what is a box squat doing for you? Why are you learning to sit back? When you're sitting back as a raw lifter, you are taking your body away from your center of gravity. The levers that are moving away from your center of gravity as you squat are your knees and your hips. The closer your knees and your hips are to your center of gravity, the stronger you're going to be. Increasing that, they call it moment arm, makes it more difficult to complete the lift. When you're learning to do squats from a box, you are basically taking your hips to the farthest position from your center of gravity and teaching yourself to squat in that position, which is not optimal. What does a conjugate lifter's bench press typically look like? You're going to see a lot more narrow benching. You're going to see a tricep dominant style of bench. The arms are going to be closer to the body. For conjugate lifters wearing their shirts, they're pushing back against this shirt this way. They are going to have to increase their row power, and they have the help of gravity and the weight on the bar to help them bring that bar down. When they press, they have the help of the shirt, and they are going to have to finish out basically the lockout. So you're going to see a lot of conjugate style lifters who are benching much more narrow and who work on their tricep development and strength. For a raw lifter, we're going to see a much more flared elbow. Now, the flared elbow is going to allow your joints to be as stacked as possible. You want to still have a nice tuck. And so this tuck is going to still allow you to generate power from your pec. It's going to get help from your shoulder. It's going to get help from your tricep. And you're going to have a more synergistic movement pushing the bar up. You're also going to have more stability and control in more of this T position. Rather than being here, you're going to be out here. You want to avoid being here because this is a loose scapula position. If your elbow is too high, your body's not going to be supporting the bar. Whereas when you tuck and you have this nice arch, your entire body is nicely underneath that bar, allowing you to push up. And if you misgroove, that bar might go up a little bit, your elbow might flare out a little bit, and you're going to be able to recover that bar better. I have rarely, if ever, seen a woman not be able to finish a bench at the top of the lift. Usually they miss their bench at the bottom, which tells me that you need to work on your bottom range strength, not your top range strength. And I'll give you some examples of some alternative exercises that I would have my lifters do versus what a conjugate lifter might do. So a conjugate lifter might do board presses, close grip presses, a lot of tricep accessories, a lot of pin presses. Those exercises are fine, but they shouldn't take up a bulk of your work as a raw lifter. For a raw lifter, I would do things that are closer to the end range of motion. So things like cambered barred benches, barred benches, anything that gets you in this position and working here for your bench is going to be ideal compared to working here for the shorter range for a raw lifter. Now, the one thing I haven't really touched on is deadlifts. I think it's really interesting that for conjugate lifters, the deadlift is the one movement where they don't seem to get very strong at it. One of the arguments for why they don't get stronger in the deadlift is because their suit doesn't really support the deadlift as much as for the squat. They're using the weight of the barbell to push themselves down into the position that they need to be in their squat, and then it allows them to pop up into the end position. Now, for a deadlift, they don't have a load that can push themselves deep into that bottom position. This is the problem with conjugate. If you don't have a force that's being exerted against your gear, you're not going to be able to get into the right position to use your gear. Conjugate lifting really focuses on building the eccentric strength. In deadlift, we just have the concentric. Raw lifters need to focus on their concentric strength. We can easily bring the bar down. We have the help of the bar and we have the help of gravity to help us get that bar down. What we need to focus on is concentric strength, moving the weight up. That's where conjugate fails. We see them fail with the deadlift. They are not able to lift as much maximal weight because their gear is not as helpful and they don't have the weight on the bar helping them fight into the bottom position of their deadlift. So where are people usually weak in the deadlift? Well, it depends. Some people are weak off the floor and some people are weak at their lockout. If you're weak at your lockout, conjugate is an excellent option for you. Having bands or chains on your bar when you deadlift is going to help you build that top end strength. If you're weak at the bottom, all you have to do is create a deficit for yourself and work through that range, and then it's going to be no problem. Now, most of the time, weakness at the top is just a positioning issue. You're not positioned right when you start, and by the time you get to the end, you're completely out of place and you can no longer use your leverages the way you need to actually complete the lift. So that's something I would work on as well. But I think conjugate really shines when it comes to deadlifts. I also am a super huge fan of deadlift variations in general. I think that a full deadlift is typically too taxing on the body to do more than once a week, especially if you do it at a high load. But I think that if you do some lower load variations of the deadlift, I think they can have very good carryover into your full raw deadlift. So that leads me to my next point about conjugate lifting is the intensity. You can't exert maximal force week after week and still do the amount of volume you'd need to do to maintain your muscle mass or build muscle mass and not get burnt out. If you are truly maxing out, even if you're doing a 3-rep max or a 5-rep max, it's too much, both mentally and physically. Mentally, because every time you go into the gym, you feel like I have to PR. And if I don't PR, I'm setting myself back. And you're not actually doing work to build. If anything, it is training your central nervous system to handle doing 1 to 3 rep maxes, but it's not actually building it to go higher. The exception to this is obviously new lifters. You could do anything you wanted and get stronger. We're talking about people who are stuck, who are plateauing, who are not advancing, doing the 1 to 3 rep maxes every single week. It's going to be harmful over the long term. The next thing, The light work that Conjugate does, I don't think is very effective, especially if you're a raw lifter and you're not on PEDs. I don't think you're going to be building a lot of muscle doing 50-60% with your compound movements. I generally think that powerlifters should avoid doing compound movements any more than they are doing for their sport specific movement. There are some exceptions to this too, so I really like overhead press and rows as additions to the powerlifting movements. In my opinion, you don't need to do a lot of shoulder work as a powerlifter. I don't think it has a lot of carryover into the squat, bench, and deadlift. I know people who have really strong overhead presses who have weak benches and vice versa. You're building general strength and you're keeping your body healthy, but I don't think that it's going to have direct carryover. I think especially for women, we need to train our pecs directly as possible. So that looks like push-ups, especially if you're already doing over body weight bench, you would want to do deficit push-ups, not modified, and do a lot of dumbbell pressing. I do think it's really good to do the isolateral movements, so one arm movements, just to maintain balance between your left and right side, because you don't want to get too imbalanced over time. You can get called for that in your competition, and it can also lead to injuries if you're not balanced. However, anytime you can do accessory movements that are going to work muscles that you don't generally hit for powerlifting, I think that's going to be really good for increasing longevity, decreasing injury rate, and increasing just overall fun, performance, musculature, everything. For example, the hamstring work that Louis Simmons was a fan of, I also am in agreement with, because that is going to help mitigate the risk of injury. As a raw squatter, your quads should be stronger than your hamstrings by way of just the amount of work that you're doing with your quads. The reason it works so well for equipped lifters is because they need a lot of hamstring strength to fight against their gear, which is their plied suits, so that they can get that bar down into the bottom of a squat and then allow that gear to get them out of the hole and to finish out that lift. This is also why the accessory work that is propagated within the Conjugate community is not directly applicable to raw lifters. Machines are ideal in terms of saving time, so you're not loading and unloading a bar all session long. If you have 4 hours to train, great, good for you, go for it. But most of the time, you're doing one lift and it takes almost an hour. And when you do your accessories, you want them to go pretty quickly. So for these, I like to do as much machine work as I can and do things like hip abductions, hip adductions, any direct glute work, any direct ham work, any direct tricep work. I would do lat pull downs, seated rows, cables, face pulls with cables, tricep push downs, overhead tricep extensions. If you want to do some biceps, go for it. Louis Simmons did not train biceps whatsoever. And he's right, biceps aren't really involved in the power lifts. You don't need them to do your squat, bench, deadlift. However, in my opinion, the lack of bicep strength led to him ripping off his biceps. I do think it's important to train biceps for overall health. And I do think it helps in performance, maybe not directly to squat, bench, deadlift, but just work your biceps. You don't need a lot. You can do one exercise per week for 3 sets of 10 and you'll be good to go. Or throw in some compound movements like rowing or pull-ups. Work the bicep indirectly just to maintain some bicep health. Having too many variables as a lifter is detrimental to your strength and performance. Too many variables means you don't know what's working and what's not working. This is a problem that I have with Conjugate. They have you rotating through your special exercises. You don't know where your strength is relative to your straight bar strength, because picture this. Even when you're using a straight bar for your lifts, you don't know where your strength really is. Yeah, you can calculate based off of a 5 rep max what your 1 rep max is, but you don't really know your 1 rep max until you do your 1 rep max. Now add in a variable like a specialty barbell, you really don't know where you're at. If you're doing several specialty barbells for several exercises, it's way too many variables, way too many factors to predict, and you would need way too much data to actually reliably predict how much carryover your SSB 1 rep max, your safety squat 1 rep max would have to your straight bar barbell. And even if you could do it, you need 4 to 5 years of data to reliably predict one person's potential progress. And even then, you have new variables such as training age, any PED usage, age-related factors, just getting older, any injuries. So you are playing with way too many variables to have reliable predictors. Now, if you argue, well, it's fun to have different movements in your workouts, I completely agree with you. I've been doing this for so long and I've gone through so many phases where I completely stopped powerlifting and I did Olympic weightlifting, I did CrossFit, I did conjugate lifting for a while. If you do conjugate lifting, you have to go into it knowing that it's not going to have a direct transfer into your powerlifting, and you have to be okay with that. They're not going to carry over as much as you think for your raw lifts. I hope you enjoyed my video. Like and subscribe for more of this kind of video. If you like my content, please let me know in the comments below. I'll see y'all soon. Thanks for having coffee with me. Bye.